If we go on to have a look at our research, so we have done a large research study looking at families with TTN-TV related DCM, and we were particularly interested in looking at what factors are associated with disease onset. This is just a little bit of a schematic about the study design. So we had over 3,000 family members from around the world, across 12 different countries. And really what we were looking at were the odds of DCM within these families. And we looked at what factors might increase or reduce these odds and used that to look at what that might mean for clinical care for those patients. And that's really what we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. So one of the main questions people often ask when they get diagnosed with a TTN-TV is if they haven't already got dilated cardiomyopathy is what is their risk of getting DCM, or what is their risk for other family members? And that's what we're looking at in these families here in these graphs. If we start by looking at this graph here on the left, what we're looking at is the percentage of people with TTN-TV that get dilated cardiomyopathy across age in years. And these are in our families. So we've got people with TTN-TV, which are in the yellow, and also family members without. And really what we can see is for those people with a TTN-TV, there's quite a sharp rise from about 30 years of age in their risk or the number of people we saw in our families getting DCM. And this increases right up until almost 100% when people were hitting around about 80 or 90 years of age. And really what that's telling us is that if somebody with a TTN-TV lives long enough, then generally they will experience some kind of heart problems throughout their lifetime. And that may be earlier for some people, or it might be quite late in others. And that's really one of the questions we're trying to answer with our research. We can also see that for the family members without a TTN-TV, they weren't at zero risk. So they did develop DCM for other reasons, though this was at a much lower level. And then if we look just at those people with a TTN-TV, and we look at different decades of age over their lifetime, what we can see similar to the graph is this increases quite rapidly. And if we look at this 50 years of age one as a median endpoint, we can see that just over half of males at this point in time will have developed DCM and just under 35% of females. So there's a difference in males and females in their risk for getting DCM. Females tend to be a little bit later than males by about 10 years. But overall, by the time they get to the 80s and 90s, the risk is quite high that they will have developed some kind of heart problems. One of the other questions we often get asked are about variants in the A band. And so if we think about Titin, it's actually separated into different regions based on where it appears in the muscle cell. So we go from the Z disc region through an I band region, A band region, and then an M band at the end. And most of the variants we saw, particularly in the initial studies, occurred in this distal I band and A band region, which is why you'll probably hear quite a lot about A band Titin variants. But what we do know is that as we look at more and more people and more families, we see that we get variants across this Titin gene, depending on how often that exon appears in the protein. We're not going to go into that, but that is generally an important factor for deciding what Titin variants to report. And so one of the questions we asked was, does having a variant in a different part of the Titin protein cause you to be at more or less risk than having a variant in the A band region? And that's what we're looking at in this graph here on the left. So same thing again, the percent of people with Titin going up vertically, across years going across horizontally. And as we can see with the yellow and blue bars, here that there are no difference in the risk of DCM for somebody having an A band variant, which is in the yellow, compared to a variant in any other region. So where your variant occurs in the protein didn't seem to matter. And then on the right here, we were having a look at whether or not the type of variant impacted your risk of getting DCM at a particular age. And so we've got nonsense variants, which were those substitution of a single base. We've got frame shift, which were the insertions or deletions that were causing an early stop. And we have splice, which is both substitution, insertion, and deletion, just at a very particular part of the DNA. And if we have a look at all three of these, there was no difference between the type of variant and your risk of DCM. So it was quite similar no matter what type of variant you had. And what this information tells us, it didn't matter where your variant was, and it didn't matter what type of variant you had to get there. If you had a truncating titin variant in one of these particular exons that we look at, then that would be important in your risk of getting dilated cardiomyopathy. So we know that there's something else going on. That means that there's some people that get DCM down at this end of the curve and other people that get DCM down that end of the curve. And so we were interested in looking at what those might be. And so I'm just going to talk you through the layout of this graph, and then I'm going to hand over to Diane to talk a little bit more about these personal risk factors. So when you're looking at this graph, we have this line running down the center, which is baseline. If you think about just baseline risk. So someone without a risk factor would be at baseline. If you have a risk factor or anything that pushes these dots over to the right-hand side of the curve, that's indicating an increased risk of dilated cardiomyopathy. Whereas if you have something that pushes those dots over to the left-hand side of the curve, like this one here, that's indicating a decreased risk of dilated cardiomyopathy. So even the people in the center still have risk. We do have people with DCM there, but we're looking at what things increase or decrease your risk depending on what side of the line they fall.